outside. So I think it was worthwhile the journey across a continent, and I thank everyone who is contributing and sharing their experiences here in the room and also online. So thank you very much and very welcome listening to the Mother Schools model and the movement of mothers across countries and continents. We are meeting here at a time that feels like a new age of enduring uncertainty. Much of what we do and say as practitioners, as researchers, as policymakers, is under siege and being undermined. Despite our commitments and best efforts, we feel that we are falling behind protecting vulnerable and at-risk youth in too many areas, ranging from recruitment to exploitation, spanning the globe from Vienna, Austria, where I am from, to Kerala, right here, and far beyond. Narcotics-related issues rank high on the list of concerns. It's especially alarming to see that drug cartels have a growing number of supporting dynamics: the climate emergency, rising energy and geopolitical conflicts, social incohesions, economic downturn. These challenges and circumstances are driving forces behind an unfavorable trend, hurting our efforts and the promise of drug-free childhood everywhere. And the UNODC latest report on the World Drug Report certainly paints a very bleak picture. For one, young people continue to use more drugs than adults, and we have heard a lot about it over the last days. And youth consumption levels are higher than in previous generations. As demand and supply goes up, so does the forcible recruitment of children and youth as peddlers, as drug mules, everywhere. With this in mind, the word stability probably will not make the noun of the year. But that does not mean that our prevention and protection work is misguided. We came together because we stand behind the principle that the drug-free childhood is a universal right. And we're also coming together to bring our brightest ideas to the table. After all, we are in direct competition with a powerful cartel and a powerful industry of criminal allies. Gangs, dealers, recruiters are working tirelessly to evolve their methods to exploit children. So, to stand a chance, we must do more. We must reclaim the recruiters' tools. We must prevent and address childhood vulnerabilities, preferably before they enter the target age group of those criminal allies. Today, and in the spirit of strengthening our united efforts, I want all of us urged to go further and focus more on early prevention, earliest prevention, to travel as upstream as possible. I'll make what I mean more tangible and clearer by sharing my organization's strategy of protecting children from neglect, violence, and recruitment through evidence-based educational programs at the grassroots level. First, however, I will lay out who I think are underrepresented role model allies for our youth safeguarding strategies. And then I will talk about Women Without Borders' own prevention model that engages precisely these overlooked actors. Here I will also take you through how our model emerged, how it works, and why it has proven impactful in communities where children are exposed to drug-related issues and extremist ideologies. And based on this, I will wrap up with policy recommendations. So now next to the missing role model, the allies. I would like to begin introducing who we could consider our missing role model allies. These are the educators and prevention actors whose potential we sometimes overlook or take for granted. Educators who can make a big difference at the early stages in the lives of children. Those impacted children before they might go down the wrong path and before hard power measures such as law enforcement and even become relevant. So who might this be? Who comes to your mind when you think about those tasked with educating and shaping the minds and prospect of the youth? In conjunction with gangs and extremism, we might often skip the first educators in the lives of children and think instead of role model teachers in classroom settings, of counselors in social services, of youth workers in community centers, maybe even football and rugby coaches. The list generally includes individuals with professional expertise and formal training. A list of role models with prescribed and trained up expertise. On the flip side, who might come to mind? Whom do we take for granted as educators of current and future generations? In the field of prevention, it's been parents, mothers and fathers who for too far long have been underappreciated allies in the fight against youth vulnerabilities. This has been the case in my area of work, preventing violent extremism, where youth safeguarding strategies took quite a while to explore the potential of parenting education, or as we call it now, parenting for peace. Yes, their role and responsibilities as educators of their children are too often taken for granted. The misconception being learning through trial and error. Parents can be expected to do as their own parents before them had, to them and other guardians in their surroundings, to learn as they go. It's almost like assembling an IKEA bookcase without reading the basic manual. It looks far too easy at first, but a lot can go wrong along the way. This is where the word stability comes back into play. If the structure is not stable, it can easily begin to wobble when tested. In the absence of a solid foundation at home, we know that children are more vulnerable to negative outside influences. They become more susceptible to peer pressure, feeling identity voids, seeking perspective and meaning elsewhere. And even when there is a stable foundation, parents still need to be prepared to respond to things that can go wrong in the lives of their children. They need not only to be aware of the early warning signs, but also to be equipped to address them before a situation escalates, to give guidance to their children and seek the right support before a situation escalates. In 2009, UNODC published a comprehensive guide to implementing family skills training programs for drug use prevention, citing factors like authoritative versus authoritarian parenting and close family bonds as effective prevention elements. Already back then, academic and practitioner consensus highlighted the importance of authoritative versus authoritarian parenting, close family bonds and the like. Why then are we still not seeing parenting skills training anywhere near the top of national and international action plans aimed at safeguarding at-risk youth? Why not? My overall proposition today is, if we want to make children matter, we need to make parenting matter. We have to broaden our mind and reimagine parents beyond the innate and instinctual, to take the role of raising the next generation as seriously as that of other professionals, of all whom generally are expected to have a degree of theoretical and practical knowledge, to be qualified for the job. Now, then we have considered parents as potential allies in prevention. I will turn how we came to this realization at Women Without Borders and what we learned along the way about our research to action journey, which informed our Parenting for Peace model, the Global Mother Schools program, and subsequently the Fathers program, which together we have now implemented across 17 countries, 3 continents, as safeguarding actors in their homes and in their communities. The building blocks came together soon after I founded Women Without Borders in 2001. This was a comparably unsettling time to now, when the world was grappling with the new realities of the post-9/11 era. A big difference is that the idea of women in soft power security at the local level was mostly just an idea. The UN's Women, Peace and Security agenda was, of course, already in full swing. And the important role of women at policy and negotiating tables was no longer questioned too much. At the grassroots and civil society levels, the voices and inclusion of women did find already broader appeal. In practice, it remained more a policy conversation for some time. And the most invisible and isolated members of communities were not being engaged in prevention work yet. It took a while. For the first decade of our organization's history, we built a women-led dialogue, a platform promoting the role of women's soft power, the Sisters Against Violent Extremism Network. This was an attempt to connect policy with gendered grassroots realities. Remember, when we look at grassroots realities, we have to factor in the gendered dimension of grassroots realities. Through various community-based pilot programs in vulnerable and isolated contexts, we started to notice how mothers had this very apparent but completely untapped potential to be part of the solution. So we started to explore this idea of mothers, peace, and security, so to speak. Our real point of departure was in 2011, when my team and I conducted a safe network-related leadership seminar in Tajikistan, Central Asia. The workshop had a very strong storytelling component, and our head psychologist was there to guide the discussion and themes. The link between parenting deficits and youth susceptibility to extremist groups was the dominant topic. Some participants talked about the lack of guidance and communication by parents in the community and how that lack was pushing children away and putting them at risk to recruitment. They were touching on the push factor potential of parents. No matter how clear and obvious things appear in retrospect, our Parenting for Peace idea needed someone to boil it down. And it just took one workshop participant to get the ball rolling. So whenever one reflected on the takeaways, one woman stood up, and I still have her in front of me, in front of my eyes, and she said, "What I have learned today is that us mothers need to go back to school." So that was the beginning of our journey and of a movement of mothers. That was a clear mandate for us at Women Without Borders. Mothers want to go back to school. So about a year later, our research team started the first in-depth study asking, can mothers challenge extremism? We studied over 1,000 mothers' attitudes towards perceptions of and experiences with radicalization and violent extremism in their families and communities in Pakistan, in Palestine, in Nigeria, and in Northern Ireland. The research suggested that mothers are ideally suited and situated to recognize and react to early warning signs of radicalization due to their place at the heart of the family, but they often lack the appropriate space, the structure, the training to develop the necessary competence and confidence to assume their prevention role. We understood that mothers, like other professionals, could benefit from a basic manual and training, that raising the next generation should not be left to intuition, instinct, and trial and error, and that expressions of violence and crime in society can in many cases be traced back to childhood experiences in the home. Our mantra since then has been, peace starts at home, but so does conflict. With all that in mind, 10 years later, and 10 years ago, we translated our research findings and launched the Mother Schools model to unlock and harness the largely untapped potential of parenting for peace. We did so with a clear goal, to stem the rising tide of violence and extremism within at-risk and affected communities worldwide. So, what are the Mother Schools in practice? Mother Schools are not physical schools. They make use of existing infrastructure of the municipal council rooms or community centers to make it easier for the participants to continue meeting beyond graduation. The Mother School Start to Finish is a year-long community-driven prevention program. It brings together groups of concerned and affected mothers of adolescent and young adults to enable them to confront threats to their children right in their homes and communities. It strengthens their individual capacity and emotional literacy and inspires action against negative influences at all levels within the community. Mother schools adapt to local drivers and build capacity, since we always work with local implementing partners and organizations, and with local psychologists, social workers, teachers who deliver the curriculum and know their communities intimately. The program provides community-level stakeholders with essential structures, tools, and skills to respond and uproot push and pull factors impacting children in everyday situations. Here in Kerala, and this is a great pleasure speaking to you here today, we're proud to have joined forces with Fourth Wave Foundation as our implementing partner organizations on the ground. And we have succeeded in engaging mothers to safeguard children from substance abuse and recruitment. I'm really inspired to see how our partners with their founding director, Diana Vincent, at the helm have been able to bring their expertise to the Mother Schools programs here in Kerala. Through Project Vendor, over the past 15 years, Fourth Wave Foundation have educated and empowered thousands of children to reject a life of drug use. Bringing their knowledge to the mother schools has been invaluable to proving how parenting education outside of formal classroom settings can address a whole spectrum of community problems beyond violent extremism. The broader relevance and practical application of the Mother Schools program has become clearer with each successive iteration. In hindsight, it makes good sense. Because family factors that make children vulnerable to extremism also put children at risk of substance abuse, exploitation, recruitment into ideology-free groups. Often factors like domestic violence, sexual abuse, and authoritarian parenting styles are leading gateway drivers that push children into the hand of recruiters. Building youth resilience by building peace at home is key to disarming external threats, drugs, extremism, and otherwise. So I now want to bring a few impact examples to you and turn to the intricacies involved in reducing youth vulnerabilities and susceptibilities through the Mother School's journey. Let's explore some of the problems and ways that mothers over time address these step by step, and let's look what kind of immediate impact their personal and group progress leads to. I will focus on the issues of drug and extremism to illustrate how the prevention principles for both are aligned. And I think this is really important, that we all work together across the specialities. I will focus on a few key ingredients that develop the necessary competence and confidence in mothers to reach their potential. The so-called Mother Schools building blocks. These are the things the program does to do, among other things, help rework family dynamics. This is of utter importance. We have to rework family dynamics, develop mothers' role model potential, and their early detection and response expertise. So, I will talk briefly about the building blocks. Awareness is our first building block. A serious barrier to the prevention potential of mothers that we often observe is a lack of actual awareness of dangers to which the children are exposed or involved in. And awareness means that they have to be spot on and they should not be in denial. And this is a habit we often observe, that mothers realized what was going on, but they tried to protect their children from the wrong perspective, actually. In Dhaka, Bangladesh, where we have been working in vulnerable communities since 2018, drug-related issues have been a leading concern. And through our work, we learned that children between the ages of 12 and 28, as young adults, were commonly being recruited as drug mules without the knowledge of their parents. Traffickers who are able to evade police detection by using children and young adults are reportedly also using children as young as 9 years. A lack of awareness leads to missing conversation and inaction. Our early mother schools implementation experience in Indonesia made this clear from the beginning. The work we did in East Java quickly revealed how recruiters are managing to send children to Syria without the knowledge of their mothers or their families and community, all of whom believed that the children were going to be temporary migrant workers in the Middle East. The recruiter I spoke with during this period always went to get the permission of the mothers who believed him. And this speaks volumes to the dangers of limited awareness levels in affected and vulnerable communities. An immediate remedy in the East Javan communities was that mothers quickly filled this gap and prevented recruiters from entering the homes. In the first place, they started to network and speak to each other, to unveil the problem. And they spread this awareness across neighboring villages so that none of the other families would give their blessings to the recruiter. One of the first impacts we usually witness, therefore, is that mothers go from being relatively unaware of threats to identifying and recognizing their presence. Regardless of whether communities face drug or extremism-related recruitment, awareness is always a first step to plugging vulnerabilities. Sometimes where drugs are drivers of extremism, these issues even coexist, overlap, or are intertwined. And the first building block of awareness itself does not mean deeper knowledge of the topic or automatically lead to action. This brings us to the next building block, which is confidence. To become effective prevention actors, mothers additionally need to close confidence gaps. Self-confidence is a foundation pillar for any individual. To be able to act on what they have now realized or what they now better understand. Building confident mothers and communities assumes a process of empowerment. In our program, it starts with trust building. As a group, as an individual, to overcome personal fears, physical and social isolation, and restrictions imposed on oneself, and all too often imposed by others. During the mother schools entry interviews, so we have all the mother schools I accompanied by research tools. At the entry interviews, we conduct at the start of each mother schools very often problems the participants are raising, and we often find clusters of statements emerge around early and forced marriages, domestic violence, the denial of basic rights, and a plethora of other psychological and physical methods that preserve a culture of systemic discrimination against women. I think this is very important to realize that this has a strong gendered component. Isolation and low self-esteem are common side effects, meaning women are less likely to have or seek access to information, networks, or other factors that are required to be role models at home and leaders outside in the communities. In the course of the mother schools, we see groups and participants break through these barriers and stand up for themselves, for each other, and carry this newfound confidence deeper into their community. So the importance of self-worth and revisiting identity constructs along the prevention journey cannot be stressed enough. Without confident women role models, communities are missing out on half of their potential prevention allies. They are invisible. This is an invisible women problem. So, we talked about the first two main building blocks, awareness and confidence, that pave the way to developing the mother schools participants' knowledge base. We see mothers become increasingly receptive and able to acquire new skills and concepts. Building on their personal transformations, they become more receptive to new ideas and practices. And this is the final step in their path in unlocking their change-making potential. It brings us to the final key building block, competence. This is when mothers acquire and implement new parenting methods that make it possible to restructure toxic family dynamics and shape more resilient homes in the process. Graduates begin to replace authoritarian approaches with authoritative approaches. They strengthen family bonds, close communication gaps, and address taboo topics, build trust and become trusted partners to their family members. And overall, they start to use their deeper practical understanding of parenting methods in their everyday lives. They apply their knowledge of threats and their warning signs. They do this beyond their own homes, and I think this is very important. For example, they also can, in this way, become role models and approachable authority figures as sisters, as friends, as neighbors, colleagues, classroom teachers. So it goes far beyond the family structure. And this is a multiplier effect of the mother school. It quickly leads to a community movement, one that could become truly a global movement one day. A movement that fortifies families and communities against extremism, drugs, and future cycles of violence. So at the start of the talk, I mentioned how this year's UNODC report points to troubling drug trends for the global youth. The same report makes a handful of excellent policy recommendations. It puts forward the need to develop national drug prevention systems that teach children as early as possible in their development and emphasizes building resilience. And I think this is spot on. The report also calls for building up parenting skills to safeguard young people who are impacted by drug-related issues. Here we are absolutely on the right path. I would only propose going a step further, broadening the lens and concurrently working further upstream. Further upstream by engaging parents of unaffected children in vulnerable communities as well. One of my policy recommendations, therefore, would be to expand the target group definition to include at-risk families, to also approach families within which the children or parents are not necessarily impacted yet. My second recommendation is simple in theory. Policy should follow research and should act on action plans, many of which have already highlighted the need to support the resilience-building potential of family-based prevention work. Research since the 1980s has consistently found that parent involvement benefits children in the short term and even more in the long term. Education on drugs and alcohol is not enough to deter a child. Among the pull factors for harmful drug and alcohol use, most are linked to mental and emotional well-being, which in turn are related to living conditions, family dynamics, and parenting. But parent engagement often lacks policy support at the national and the local level, leaving the implementation and adaptation of programs and resources to community entities. The mother schools are one example of a program that has managed to overcome this barrier of being limited geographically and thematically. Women Without Borders supports entities to ensure that the program being implemented has all the necessary resources, but it works tightly with organizations and individuals at the local level to adapt the program to cultural and national nuances and rolls out each program in cooperation. This has made it applicable and adaptable to divergent demographies and community contexts worldwide. The Indian government has already followed the research. India's 2018-23 National Action Plan for Drug Demand Reduction presents two important actionable points. For prevention, the NAP suggests awareness generation programs involving schools, teachers, and parents. Under capacity building, the NAP advocates providing forums for parents and equipping them with the necessary skills. These are important mandates that make moving from research to action possible. They provide the necessary policy support and basis to begin identifying and supporting evidence-based and tested parenting programs locally, yet nationwide. Programs that manage to gain access by earning and building community trust. So before I conclude, I want to repeat the question that I asked earlier. Why are we still not seeing parenting skills training anywhere near the top of many national and international action plans aimed at safeguarding at-risk youth? Alternatively, we need to build on our prevention and intervention successes, work evidence into action, double down on effective strategies, and continuously adapt them to different contexts and changing circumstances. In this way, we can disarm the attraction to recruiters and the effectiveness of external drivers and toxic influences. We can give children the best possible chance by plugging childhood-related vulnerabilities early on and in real time, not to wait for conditions to change. Doing all our part by reducing susceptibility right at the local level. And this will help us to avoid playing catch-up and falling further behind drug lords and recruiters. With the right tools and approaches, we can get ahead of this. Much of our work must therefore consider children before they become vulnerable as targets and before they reach the age of susceptibility. Prevention work through local level education is already a key part of this strategy, but it needs to transcend action plans and be institutionalized alongside other vocational and formal training programs. For now, policy still needs to catch up to one universal principle. If we are to make children matter, we always need to make parenting matter. Children matter, but parenting does matter as well. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I've consumed the full length of my presentation.
I think any questions we can ask in person or...
Sure, you're very welcome. Is there room for a question or should we do it in the break?
Maybe in the break.
Maybe in the break. Thank you so much for your attention. It was a pleasure and a privilege to present the model to all of you. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see the step. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith, for sharing this important statement indeed, that parents matter as well as children, and that we should focus on them as well in our programs. We want to share a little video first before we continue to the panel discussion.
ഭയങ്കര എക്സൈറ്റഡ് ആയിരുന്നു. മക്കളോടുള്ള പെരുമാറ്റ രീതിയിൽ ഒരുപാട് മാറ്റം വന്നു. തുറന്നു പറയാനായിട്ട് നല്ലൊരിടം. മദേഴ്സ് സ്കൂളോ നമ്മൾ കേൾക്കുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ അങ്ങനെയല്ലേ കുട്ടികളല്ലേ സ്കൂളിൽ പോകാം. മദേഴ്സിന് സ്കൂളാണ്. ആദ്യം ഒരു കൗതുക തോന്നി. അവരെല്ലാവരും ഒരേ സ്വരത്തിൽ പറഞ്ഞ കാര്യമാണ് ഞങ്ങളുടെ സ്വഭാവത്തിൽ മാറ്റം വന്നു, ഞങ്ങളുടെ ജീവിതചര്യകളിൽ മാറ്റം വന്നു, മക്കളോടുള്ള പെരുമാറ്റ രീതിയിൽ ഒരുപാട് മാറ്റം വന്നു. നമ്മളെല്ലാവരും ഒന്നാമൊരു ഫീലിംഗ് വന്നു. എല്ലാവരും ഓപ്പണായിട്ട് ഷെയർ ചെയ്യാം.
പ്രോജക്റ്റ് വേണ്ടയെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം കുട്ടികളെ ലഹരി പദാർത്ഥ ദുരുപയോഗത്തിൽ നിന്നും സംരക്ഷിക്കുന്നതിൽ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നത് പാരൻസിനാണ്, എസ്പെഷ്യലി മദേഴ്സ്
സ്കൂൾ വന്നിട്ട് ഒരുപാട് കാര്യങ്ങൾ പഠിക്കാൻ സാധിച്ചു. ഞങ്ങളുടെ വീട്ടിൽ ഒരാൾക്കൊരു മാറ്റം വന്നപ്പോൾ മൊത്തം ഫാമിലിക്ക് മാറ്റമായി.
അവരുടെ ഉള്ളിലെ വേദനകളും സങ്കടങ്ങളൊക്കെ അവർക്ക് തുറന്നു പറയാനായിട്ട് ഒരു ഇടം കണ്ടെത്താനായിട്ട് ഞങ്ങൾക്കിവിടെ കഴിഞ്ഞു.
നല്ല ക്ലാസ്സാണ്, വളരെ ഉപകാരപ്രദമായ, നമുക്ക് അറിയാൻ പാടില്ലാത്ത കുറേ കാര്യങ്ങൾ അറിയാനും പറ്റി.
അമ്മ എന്ന നിലയിൽ നമുക്ക് കുറേയേറെ മാറ്റങ്ങൾ വരുത്താൻ സാധിച്ചു.
നമ്മൾ കേൾക്കാൻ ആരും ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല.
മക്കളുടെ വളർച്ചയിൽ ഒരപ്പൻ്റെ അമ്മയുടെ റോൾ എങ്ങനെയാണ്, അതൊക്കെയാണ് അവിടെ പറഞ്ഞു തരണത്.
അപ്പോൾ ആളുകൾ കൂടിയെന്ന് അവരുടെ മുമ്പിൽ പോയി നിൽക്കാൻ പോലും എനിക്ക് പേടിയാണ്. അങ്ങനത്തെ ഒരു സ്വഭാവമായിരുന്നു എൻ്റെത്. ഇത്തിരിയൊക്കെ മാറ്റം വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്, അതിൽ കുറേയൊക്കെ മാറ്റം വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്.
എല്ലാ അമ്മമാർക്കും, ഞാനുൾപ്പെടെ എല്ലാ അമ്മമാർക്കും നല്ല ആത്മവിശ്വാസം കിട്ടി.
ശരിക്കും ഇപ്പം ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞില്ലേ, ഇപ്പം ഇന്ന് വന്ന് സംസാരിക്കണം തന്നെ എന്നെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം ഒരു ആദ്യത്തെ കാര്യമാണ്.
അപ്പം അത്രയും എനിക്ക് ഇഷ്ടമുള്ളത് കൊണ്ടാണ് ഞാൻ ഇങ്ങനെ വരുന്നത്. സൂപ്പർ. ഇനിയും ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ഇനിയും വരും, അത്ര തന്നെ.
നല്ല അമ്മമാരാകാം, കൂടുതൽ ബെറ്റർ അമ്മ ആവണം എന്നുള്ള നമ്മളെല്ലാവരും ആഗ്രഹിക്കണം.
great video shows the example just explained by Dr. Edith. I want to introduce now to a panel discussion which will be moderated by Dr. Kuriakose Augustine. So I first would like to introduce him, and then he will take over the rest of the bios. Dr. Kuriakose Augustine is the head of the Department of Psychology at Don Bosco Arts and Science College, Eritrea. And at the same time, I would like to call him on stage, as well as our panelists, Dr. Atul Ambekar, Dr. Harvey Milkman, Mr. Mousa Daoud, and Mr. Rogers Kasirye.
Good afternoon. Right from yesterday, we have been discussing a lot, hearing a lot about children matter. And we have been meandering the path around this topic a lot. At this noon panel session, we will be again zeroing in on the Article 33, right to a drug-free childhood, the right of children to be protected. And we have 4 panelists. Could I have the presentation, please? I would request all of you to, up your antennas to zero in on this, the main topic of our entire conference. And we will have 4 different presentations from professionals in this area. So I would just situate the presentations of our panelists, and then we will have the time to listen to them. I would introduce the panelists as they come to speak. In 2018, the UN Organization for Drugs and Crime and World Health Organization came up with the international standards on drug use prevention. And that gives us a background to understand how children can be really prevented and protected from the dangers of drugs. Prevention has many meanings and levels. The first is to prevent the primary prevention of drug use itself, even for the first time. And secondly, when a child has begun to use the drugs, how to protect them further. And more importantly, how to give them a hopeful and healthy childhood with right engagement. This is the broader aim for prevention and also affording protected environment for children. So our whole question is how to ensure that children and youth are actually protected from the use of drugs, which is in heavy supply. The international standards propose 3 levels of engagement. First is effective programs, right on the grassroots level. Then policies, maybe at regional, national, international levels. And then we have effective systems put in place to ensure that children have a drug-free childhood. The important thing is to protect them right through, right from infancy or even conception throughout their stages of development. And we have the critical stages of transition, childhood to adolescence, adolescence to youth, and youth to adulthood. So these are the critical stages of transition which needs to be taken note of by anyone engaged in this area. So we have universal protection at international levels. We have selective protection at the level of groups, and we also have individuals. And every child, individual child, whether they are in the ambit of a school or organization, or even not in the ambit of a family, is important. And our panelists would also be speaking about both individual and environmental areas of protection. The last group, marginalized settings, is something which is to be paid attention to. Once a child walked up to my table and took a book from my table, lifted it up, turned it around, had a good look, and then asked me, "How is this book made?" He was not going to be a businessman. The child was totally ignorant of how a book is made. The child had not been to school, and the child was already 12 years old. There are children who are not even in the ambit of schools. So our efforts need to cover every child, whichever space they are, whether they are in a refugee camp, whether they are from a tribal or indigenous setting, or in an organized setting, or even not even a member of a proper defined family. So all these categories of children are our priority also. An approach that has been successful in any part of the world can be a good bet to try in other places. Yesterday, Matej invited us to look at things that don't work and call agencies and individuals to accountability. We can also look at those models or efforts that do work and then maybe replicate it on a larger scale. So over to our panelists. We have first Dr. Ambekar. He is a professor at the National Drug Dependence Treatment Center of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi. And his areas of expertise are public health and alcohol and drug use, drug policies and programs, and especially training and human resource development on substance use. He has also done extensive research and published articles, books, and training materials on the same. He is also the Secretary General of Addiction Psychiatry Society of India and member, Board of Directors of the International Society of Addiction Medicine. Being a medical doctor, doctor has a bedside view of the protection that children and youth need to be afforded, and also as Secretary General of the Addiction Society of India and Board of Member of the International Society, an eagle's view of what happens in the active world. So over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, sir. And at the outset, my sincere thanks to the organizers, Fourth Wave, Joseph, Diana, for having me here. I know the time is short, so I'll be very quick in whatever I need to share so that we have hopefully some time to discuss also. So basically, we know that all sort of psychoactive substance use or drugs as we call them is generally an adult phenomena. generally is the grown-ups which use these drugs and substances and have been using literally for thousands of years. The problem is children may start them, only a small minority of them may develop addiction. But then the consequences when children use drugs or children develop drug use disorders, they are devastating. And that's why we need to have, even though small minority of this population, but we need to have special focused attention to this problem of drug use and drug use disorders by children. So what exactly do we mean by drugs here? Basically, a wide variety of substances have been and are being used by the humankind to change their mental state. Some of them actually at the international level have been put in the category of narcotic or psychotropic. Ideally, this should have been done solely on the basis of scientific evidence regarding which are more harmful. More harmful, which means they require more control. Sadly, that has not been the case. A lot of racism and colonialism has gone into deciding what goes as narcotic and psychotropic and what doesn't. Remember the time when the drugs were being classified as narcotic or psychotropic? The opium, the cocaine, the cannabis were all products and had been used by the global south. The modern developed world was happily producing and consuming alcohol and tobacco. And that's why at the international level, we had some drugs more demonized than the other. There has also been some distinction about legal versus illegal drugs or recreational versus medical use, which is also a very fine line there. So it's not very easy to classify what is a medical purpose use and what is a recreational use. A headache in the evening, which is cured by taking a cup of coffee, is it a medical use of coffee or just a recreational use of coffee? These are not very easy distinctions to make. And unfortunately, that's how things stand today. There are some substances which have more degree of social approval and there is government regulations over them. Some others which are totally banned and criminalized. So there should have been a very, very sharp line of demarcation between them in terms of these are harmful and these are not so harmful. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. As we shall see shortly, drugs can cause harms on a variety of counts. Addiction, the health harms to others, and so on. And there has been plenty of research actually in comparing various psychoactive substances in terms of how much harms they can cause. Harms to the individual as well as harm to the others. And subsequently it has been replicated many times. And the results have really been eye-opening there. The substances which we regard largely globally as legal substances, alcohol or tobacco, are among the top substances in terms of harm to human health. Some of the illegal and controlled substances, they are perhaps much less harmful than alcohol and tobacco, such as cannabis. So the point here to understand is that there is no direct correlation between levels of harms a substance causes and the levels of control the government, the society, the international authorities, they exercise over it. In fact, this control is largely decided by a variety of factors such as politics or diplomacy, such as the commercial or economic interest, and to some extent by the scientific evidence and the logic of it. So one of the take-home messages which we should carry back home is, and there will be quite a few of such messages in my talk, a drug with legal status does not necessarily mean that it is safe than the drugs which are branded as illegal. That's one. This is something we must also ponder upon. What is worse really? A child using legal substances like alcohol or tobacco, or a child using illegal drugs? I would say for a child, in fact, using any psychoactive substances is harmful. So there is really little to sort of demarcate between when it comes to children, what they should be allowed, they shouldn't be. In most of our households, we would even discourage our small children from drinking tea or coffee. We'll tell them, drink milk now, when you grow up, you can have tea or coffee as much as you want. So a developing child's brain, particularly, we need to be much more sensitive towards it. This is also an important point for us to understand. Does really prohibition or criminalization of use of some substances help reduce access to these drugs for children? And for this, we need to look at the hardcore epidemiological data. I'm going to refer very quickly to some of the findings of this magnitude of substance use in India, the National Survey report from India, where we looked at a wide variety of substances, both legal as well as illegal substances, and their prevalence in terms of percentage of people using them among children and among adults. So to cut the long story short, what we found is that for a legal substance like alcohol, the difference between adult percentage and the children percentage was very wide. For illegal drugs, this difference was very narrow. So what does this indicate? This indicates this, that access for children is much more difficult for legal substances. It's easy to understand. A bartender, a wine shop salesperson can be trained not to sell this to children. How do you train a drug peddler? Do you tell them that don't sell this to children, sell this only to adults? They will be arrested straight away. So that's the reason why it is said that if you want to have access to children, some degree of regulation for the market would be important. So another take-home message for us would be prohibition for a drug or a ban does not guarantee that its access will be proportionately difficult for children. But then what about Article 33? There are quite a few people who swear by the CRC's Article 33 and its language, which says, the emphasis is added mine here, illicit use of narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances are which children should be protected against. So does this mean, is it okay if children are allowed to smoke and drink? Certainly not. That actually means that we should be exercising caution in terms of interpretation of CRC there, and access to children for all kinds of psychoactive substances must be equally controlled. It's not enough to say that we are controlling illegal drugs access more strongly to children as opposed to alcohol and tobacco. In fact, this whole debate, Article 33, scholars have really debated this in the scientific literature and have written very good papers on this. I'm just referring to two of them, how important it is to protect children from drugs and how to interpret the Article 33. So, another take-home message from my side would be that Article 33 need not be very narrowly defined, and protecting children from all addictive substances is equally important. And very importantly, the second point, children need to be also protected from those policies which criminalize their drug use. We find a 16-year-old child carrying a small pocket of ganja in his pocket, caught by police. Where is this child going to be helped more? In an NGO setting where he can receive counseling, or in a detention home with other juveniles who are in conflict with law? So in other words, if there are policies which criminalize drug use, how do you then apply these policies to children less than 18 years of age? We need to have much more empathic and kind of compassionate approach towards this population. There are a wide variety of factors that we know which increase people's vulnerability to drug use. The number one of such factors is the biological vulnerability, the genetic factors which increase make changes in your brain. There is not much that we can do about it. And yesterday, Dr. Arun Kandaswamy gave us a very good example of a loaded revolver. So the loaded revolver is the brain which has the vulnerability. The social environmental factors like this, they are actually the triggers which set this gun off. These are the triggers on which we can do something. So there are a wide variety of environmental factors which can be addressed to prevent drug use among children, such as underprivileged economic status, poverty, social norms and attitudes, the peer influence, being out of school. So simply just because children are more protected inside schools, all policies which keep children in school are likely to be good drug prevention strategies as well. So something as mundane as our midday meal programs in India, which ensure that children do not drop out from school, are good drug prevention activities as well. So drug prevention need not be seen as very narrow thing, but in general, strategies, interventions which make world a better place for children are going to be good and effective drug prevention policies as well. So reducing risk factors for drug use is crucial, and for this we need to have a more bird's eye view kind of approach to have a more just and fair society for children to growing up. Finally, this issue is often debated upon. Where should we put more resources and efforts towards? Prevention of drug use or treatment of people with drug use disorders? And many people would actually believe in the very simplistic explanation of this. Prevention is better than cure, a stitch in time, and blah, blah, blah. The issue here is when we provide treatment to someone, it acts as prevention for other individuals. We remember peer influence is a very important factor in drug use initiation as well as maintenance of drug use. So if I am suffering from drug use disorders and I receive treatment, I stop taking drugs, the risk that someone else will initiate in my influence, that risk will go down. So it's like vaccines. So if you provide treatment to more people, there will be lesser the risk of others being influenced under them. So let us not discount the importance of treatment for those suffering from drug use disorders, those suffering from addiction. And coming to treatment, it should be very important that what we call as treatment should be, yes, I'm just concluding. We should call as treatment should be evidence-based and compliant with human rights. Remember, we say as far as human rights are concerned, consent of the patient is very important for receiving any intervention. It becomes a tricky issue when you have children suffering with drug addiction and they are not motivated. How do you ensure that their right to give assent, permission, consent is protected? So we need to be sensitive, our treatment services need to be sensitive to that aspect as well. So finally, I'll conclude with this message that right to a drug-free childhood is best realized when all the other rights of the children are ensured and we have a more just and fair society where children can grow up to. I invite all of you next month to this wonderful conference happening in Bangalore, in the first few days of Bangalore, NIMHANS Bangalore, by Addiction Psychiatry Society of India. All of you are welcome to attend the conference. I'll conclude with this quote by Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We thank Atul, Dr. Atul for that wonderful presentation. We have a minute to field questions to Dr. Atul in case you have some pressing questions that you need to ask him. Yes, please.
I must thank Dr. Ambekar for giving a great insight to the whole conference we are in. Because this was a theme which I was looking forward for so many years, particularly in the state of Kerala now, when there is a lot of debate on what are drugs exactly. Because it's very clearly mentioned, alcohol is drug number one. And that has been a wonderful study which has been promoted by the government of India, and nobody is looking into the study. That's a very sad part. When I stand here, when Kerala government is gearing up a big campaign, ignoring the real fact that alcohol is drug number one, and highlighting by some corners that MDMA is the most dangerous drug, which is not true. Because facts should always remain as a facts. And truth should not be underdone, because this is something, and also regarding this Article 33, we have to look into that part, and I feel that that should be a recommendation from this Children Matter Conference, that Article 33, there should be some changes, some amendment, and I think that will be a good resolution. Thank you.
Dr. Atul, any comments on the...
Thank you. I take this comment. I received this note. Thank you very much for your comments.
Any other question? Yes.
Sir, you have broadly classified drugs under two heads, narcotic and psychotropic. I would like to know the basic differences between these two types. I mean, which is more injurious to brain?
I wish the answer was very simple. I wish the people who matter, people who decide this classification, they were basing this classification specifically on the harms of the drugs. But
historically that has not been the case. As I was saying, it is a lot of politics, lot of diplomacy, lot of colonialism and racism which has gone into categorizing what is narcotic, psychotropic and what is not. Today, as things stand, in general, narcotics are supposed to be those which are much more addictive, and psychotropic are supposed to be which are slightly less addictive. But there are other drugs which are neither narcotic and psychotropic, but which can be very harmful, such as alcohol and tobacco. That's a short answer to this question, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Atul. The next speaker is Dr. Harvey Milkman. And Dr. Harvey Milkman is Professor Emeritus, Department of Psychology, Metropolitan State University of Denver, USA. He's also visiting professor at Reykjavik University, Iceland. And he received the Fulbright Scholar Award at the Department of Psychology, Reykjavik University, and was the recipient of a Fulbright Hayes Lectureship Award at the National University of Malaysia. Dr. Milkman is the author of numerous articles and books on the causes, consequences, and treatment choices on the broad spectrum of addiction behaviors. And at this panel, Dr. Harvey Milkman would be speaking particularly on supportive environment for brain development. After this, we will have a short time for clarifications depending on the time available, but I would request the interventions to be brief and questions to be pointed. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Today, we'll talk a little bit about the brain, and the brain is an amazing organ. The brain will never understand the brain, but we'll do something about it. It's the most complicated entity in the universe. And I think the challenge for the 21st century is for the society to orchestrate our brain's natural chemicals to produce natural ways of feeling good rather than the counterfeit substances that people use. So we'll talk about the brain as a natural giant pharmaceutical factory that manufactures its own mind-altering chemicals, and I can prove it. Actually, kids like to have a lot of fun, and when you talk to kids about substances, lectures, they would be out of here in 5 minutes if you lectured to them about the kind of things we're talking about today. So let's have a little bit of fun, and I'll prove that the brain is a natural chemical manufacturing company. I'd like you to turn to the person next to you, and at the count of 3, I want you to give them a fist bump and scream out, "I am special." Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Fist bump. I am special. Okay, so now you see the laughter and you see the smiles, and I'm sure that most of you had a nice healthy dose of dopamine in your nucleus accumbens of your brain. And we'll talk about how the brain works today and some of the things that healthy and unhealthy environments create healthy brains, and brains create the architecture for the life experience. I'm trying to make this thing work. So is this going to work? Right. Okay, there we go. So talking about brain development. This is the outline of topics that I'm going to cover in the next 10 minutes, and it's a pretty healthy outline, but let's take a look at where we can go. In terms of brain development, the brain sets the architecture for the rest of your life, and what happens in childhood sets the tone for many things, but it's not irreparable. We can have a brain that is not healthily managed in childhood, and we still have, because of the field of epigenetics, we can reverse some of the genetic influences that have been negatively signatured by negative environments. In the first few years of life, I think this is an amazing slide, more than 1 million new neural connections are formed every second. Can you imagine that? This is a newborn baby that is part of our family right now. My partner's here with me, and this is our grandchild, and he's 3 months old. But every second of his life, he's scanning the environment. Next time you see a little baby, look at the little baby and see what they're doing. And they're forming 1 million new neural connections every second of their life. And so what happens with those neural connections? And they fire, when they get practiced and rehearsed, they fire together. Here's another little exercise I want to do with you. I want you to repeat after me the statement on the chart. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Can you repeat that? Neurons that fire together, wire together. Okay, so let's give them the right stuff. If the neurons that are going to be firing together wire together, if they're wiring in unhealthy environments, we're going to have problems throughout the lifespan. And so that's a very important axiom about how the brain functions. You can see here the brain's ability to change in response to experiences. In the first few years of life, it's very easy. The brain has plasticity. It can change. And so if we have negative childhood experiences, we can bring out healthy environments and nurturing environments, and the brain can change even if they grow up in poverty or other kinds of difficult circumstances. But as we get older, try and learn a new language when you're 50 years of age. That's a very difficult challenge. And so the older we get, the more difficult it is for the brain to change. So I'd rather build a child than to fix an adult. Let's consider that another axiom from this talk. It's better to build a child than to fix an adult. This is we talk about toxic influences on the brain, and many times in this conference we talked about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and look what happens to the brain under the conditions of abuse, violence, neglect, poverty. It's like revving your car up for days or weeks on end. What's going to happen to your engine if you don't shut it off? And you can see here the slide on the right has the elements of brain damage. So the brain actually becomes damaged by adverse childhood experiences, particularly when they're conducted over long periods of time. The result of these toxic experiences are addiction, mental illness, physical illness. We talk about something called the allostatic load. People can go on for 10, 20, 30 years of their life, and then all of a sudden they break down because of this constant dose of cortisol that affects the way the body and brain are working. So you don't want to have an allostatic load. And so we want to prevent the chronic stress that can affect addiction, mental illness, and physical illness. Epigenetics is the good news, that this is the science of how environmental influences affect the expression of genes. And this is one of the new areas of research and science, and it's very important. So that during development, genes accumulate chemical signatures from the environment. And if you have negative environments, the genes can be expressed in dangerous ways. If you have healthy environments, the genes can have other forms of expression. And so different experiences can rearrange the way the genes are expressed. And the genes determine whether you may have depression or anxiety or even schizophrenia or other kinds of mental disorder. And so what we're trying to do is produce healthy children. We no longer talk about the genetics that determine your fate. That's genetic nihilism. You're not determined by your genetics. And really, it's a combination of genes and environment, and that's really what sets the tone for healthy life experiences. So, how can we reduce or reverse the effects of toxic stress and adverse childhood experiences? Positive relationships, encouragement, supportive environments, after-school activities. Those are all the things that can promote the healthy genetic expression and a healthy brain development throughout the lifespan. Let's talk a little bit about neurotransmission. In order to fire, a brain has to have three things in common. It has to have enzymes, receptor sites, and neurotransmitters all lined up. And of course, the enzymes are things that you inherit from your parents, from your DNA, from your RNA, which tells the cells how to develop the enzymes. So we're all under enzyme control. Did you know that? Enzymes control your levels of neurotransmission. So next time around, pick your parents carefully because you're under enzyme control. Myelination is another element of the science of brain. It's sort of now we're starting to understand the effect of the coating of the neurons with the fatty substance that coats the axon fibers. And of course, this determines the speed of neurotransmission and the accuracy of how the neurons fire. And if you have unhealthy myelination, particularly during middle childhood and adolescence, then you'll have unhealthy brain development, and you'll have a kind of brain that doesn't function as well. You'll have a kind of brain damage. So what's the answer to that? Healthy environment. The environment is the therapist. And so let's think about that as another axiom from this talk. The environment is the therapist. With children, you can't talk to them. They don't talk about their problems when they're 5 years old or 4 years old very well. You don't want to medicate them. So what is the answer? The answer is create a healthy environment for the kids. The spotlight on middle childhood. We often neglect middle childhood. It's the forgotten years. This is when myelination occurs. The cortical gray matter is being formed. We also have synaptic pruning. The brain rids itself of neurons that are not being used. Do you know what? One of the most important discoveries in brain science in the last 100 years is that schizophrenia is related to aberrant pruning during adolescence. And so if you think about it, schizophrenia occurs during late adolescence, early adulthood, and when we have too much pruning, we have the opportunity for the brain to develop in an aberrant way. Autism is connected with too little pruning. And so you have these different areas of research that are very, very important in terms of brain science. The aerobic exercise is very important during middle childhood. It actually sounds mundane, but to give the kids an opportunity to feed their brain the proper amounts of oxygen and the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in a healthy way. So we want to encourage aerobic literacy during childhood. That's one of the most important protectors of the brain. The amazing teenage brain is another incredible part of the science of how we work with kids. And of course, the brain is still plastic during teenage years. It gets more difficult, as we showed in the earlier slide, but during teenage years, we can see here part of the problem. Between the ages of 16 and 17, the adolescent is most likely to appreciate the benefits of a hot-risk situation, going in a car with someone who's driving drunk or getting high on alcohol or drugs. They see the benefits of it, and they're more likely to evaluate the benefits rather than the risks. And this little mouse is kind of a cartoon way of saying it, not to say that teenagers are like little mice, but I can get totally away with this. I think that's an interesting sort of way of thinking about the teenage brain. Well, let's talk about natural highs. This is a term that it's been a signature of my work over the years. I mean, how do you orchestrate the brain to have natural ways of being healthy? And that's the challenge, as I started out talking about, for the 21st century. So natural highs are the alternative, the antidote to the addictive highs, the drugs that people use. In my work, and we've had a lot of good responses from this, you notice in this conference we talk about the whole range of things that people can get addicted to. We talk about screenagers and kids getting addicted to gambling and sex and crime and pornography and so on. So the addiction, the brain can become addicted to activities as well as drugs. So let's think about a modern definition of addiction: self-induced changes in neurotransmission that result in problem behaviors. Notice we didn't say drugs. Self-induced changes in neurotransmission that result in problem behaviors. Well, what's the antidote to that? Natural highs. Self-induced changes in the chemistry of the brain that result in health and well-being for the individual and society. And now if you're thinking about a teaching model, you want to include psychology, biology, sociology in the whole picture, and that definition includes all three of those. I think this is an Ethiopian proverb that is really well taken. When spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. So we're not going to solve this problem with any one discipline. We need to have many ways of looking at this issue. The policy implications and future directions of this whole concept of looking at the brain. I had the benefit of working for 10 years with an African-American dance company, and we gave teenagers artistic and athletic and adventure-based alternatives to drugs and crime. We had marvelous success. This is an Indian saying that I think it just came my way a couple of days ago. In form through structure, in body through dance, in word through poetry, in sound through music, in thought through yoga. When man discovers the order and rhythm, he touches the divine within himself. And so these are natural highs. And so this is the way of orchestrating. Remember, you had a little dose of dopamine in the beginning of my talk. You can get a very prolonged dose of dopamine by following these kinds of natural things, that human talents that people can have meaningful engagement of their own talents with. This is a prelude to the presentation by my colleague, Margaret Lilja, who will talk about the Icelandic model. This is what inspired this talk for me. If you look at the asterisk, a yellow line there, you can see the percentage of 6 to 9-year-old children in the entire city of Reykjavik, the capital city of Reykjavik, is Reykjavik of Iceland. And 96% of all the kids are involved in after-school activities between the age of 6 and 9. And they're doing art, music, and dance and sport, and they're getting natural ways of orchestrating the chemistry of their brain. And I said, what could be happening to their brain? Well, their brain is developing in a healthy way. This is the project that and we talked a little bit in this conference about not leaving kids behind who already have harmful involvement with alcohol or drugs. And so this is a project working with kids who are in the second stages of prevention, which we call secondary prevention or tertiary. They already have had beginning signs of becoming involved with. So we gave them art, whatever they wanted, hip-hop, rap, music, they all want to be Bollywood dancers. And so we gave them whatever they wanted, and we gave them natural highs as an alternative to drugs and crime. We had marvelous results with thousands of kids, and so to improve family life and improve mental health. So the policy implications: brain optimization promotes health and well-being for the individual, the community, and throughout the lifespan. And so another angle of this is to think about how the brain is developing, and if you want a healthy community, we want to build healthy brains. I'll leave you with two important points in Proverbs. This is an Icelandic proverb. It's too late to cover the well when the child has fallen into it. And the Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We thank Professor Harvey Milkman for that wonderful presentation, telling us about the environment for brain development, environment as therapist, and also about natural highs. Our next speaker, I'm sorry, we will be taking the questions at the end together. Our next speaker is Dr. Mousa Abdullah Abdel Daoud. Dr. Daoud is the president of the Jordanian Anti-Drugs Society. He is a member of the Jordanian Commission on Drugs and the head of the Arab Network of Drugs Control.
And can we all together say Duba Duba, which is the beginning of the dopamine adventure team? Duba Duba! One more time. Duba Duba! Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Now you wake up a little bit. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel very privileged to be a part of such event. And I would like to thank all the organizers and the sponsors also for giving us the opportunity and the chance to joining you. And such event like the And when we think about the childhood and drug-free childhood, we need to go through all the relatives surrounding the children. If we concentrate on children and forget the parents or the brothers, siblings, then what's the use of taking care of children? Most of us work and address prevention, early prevention, as Matai said yesterday, treatments, recovery, harm reduction even, advocacy, drug policies, all of these, the target of all of these efforts is to keep the human being, not only the children. But now I would like to go through some critical issue, which is the relapse, because after treatment and recovery, we have some numbers. I will go through the numbers, but I would like to ask you a simple question. How many ex-addicted people return to use drugs? What's the percentage you think? Keep it in your mind. And I would like to present today some numbers and what's behind those numbers. The methods, what we did, we review, decide, and take the action. And also, I will share with you at the end of the presentation the results of the dopamine model, which is the Jordanian model, Duba. The numbers showing that the studies show that the relapse rate is 40 to 60%, that's globally, in the first 30 days. And it reached 85% of the people in the first year after the treatment. 85%. Can you imagine this number? So all those efforts before the prevention, early prevention, and treatment and recovery, 85% of them will go through the wind. So we need to go through some serious and long-term early prevention to reduce the relapse rate. That's why we go through some elements that surrounded the ex-addicted people who's fully treated. The first element was the people around him, the people who surround him. The other one, because I know I have a very short time, so I would like to share with you some photos. The second element will be his mental health and the places he used to be in with the time and how they consume the time. When we go through these four elements, we can make a very strategical plan dealing with them. But those elements doesn't finish yet. The fifth element is the things and the poor self-care of himself, relationships, and maybe isolations, and stigma as well. And not finally, the pride overconfidence of the ex-addicted people, which will lead him to relapse again. So what we did regarding to address these things, we communicate with the ex-addicted people, outreach, keep in touch with them. Then we start do some extraordinary activities like walking with them, city side, and hiking, some adventure, which will, communicate with the nature and trying to help each other, camping, trying to found a new life with new people, and sightseeing, visiting some cities around us in Jordan as well. I'll show you some photos about the team, the dopamine team. And at the beginning, they were very scary to show their faces, afraid from stigma. And after a while, when they become mature, they start feel more confident, and they start trying to give their friends, colleagues, and they serve the communities. The dopamine team become bigger and growing by the time. We become more mature, and the adventure become more serious. Very serious. That's me, by the way. This is a training of declining the mountains. The team become more professional. And we grow up by the years. That's me. Roman theater inside the capital of Jordan. I'll show you a small video. I don't know if there's any sound can be there. Thank you. Thank you. Let us leave the claps for the results. Then to conclude, we have to go through the results. I still have time, by the way. First year, we succeed to serve 12 ex-addicted people, and they participate in our program, and we have 100% successful rate with 0 relapse. Thank you. Again, 2017, 19 participants with a 0 relapse and 100% successful rate. 2018, 85 ex-addicted participants with 85 successful rate, so it is 100% successful rate again. In 2009, we managed to serve 32. 2020, during COVID-19, we could serve 19 participants, and 2021, we could serve 99 participants in Jordan with 100% successful rate. And in this year, we supposed to have around 189 participants with 100% successful rate with 0 relapse. And to conclude, relapse percentage can be reduced significantly by implementing a certain reintegration program. So I hope our dopamine model and Jordanian model inspire you that there's still hope working with the ex-addicted people. Thank you so much.
We thank Dr. Daoud for that wonderful presentation and for giving us a closer view of how natural dopamine works. Now we have Mr. Rogers Kasirye, who is an experienced NGO leader and expert consultant on youth in sub-Saharan Africa. He has worked extensively on research to implement programs and to inform policy on pervasive health risks that face the youth population. He has served in a technical consultant capacity to inform research for the World Health Organization and various UN bodies. He is currently serving as the World Federation Against Drugs Vice President, Africa. He has completed his PhD in social work at Makerere University in the area of resilience and children. We invite Dr. Rogers Kasirye to make his presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Observing the protocol because of time. Grateful to Fourth Wave for the invitation, but also grateful to WFAD, where I serve as the Vice President, for the support, and the UN for the support we've given. I want to bring the subject matter home, because when we talk about the light to a drug-free childhood, what are we looking at? I think we are presupposing that children are entitled, children have certain entitlement, which we must observe, which we must adhere to, which we must provide. I think that's what is presupposed in this world, the right to a drug-free world. And as you can see from here, from my presentation, you can see I'm discussing that childhood should be peaceful. Childhood should be fun. All children should have fun. All children should, childhood should be a time of joy. And nobody should deny children to have joy. I'm also discussing, like Professor has shared, that this is a time for brain development. Any interruption will bring problems. Now, if childhood is supposed to be like that, then synonymously, when you discuss childhood, you are also bringing in the word well-being at the end. You see my green arrow going that side. Well-being. Well-being of children. It's not just a mere absence of diseases. It's just not because the child is able to play, but it is a spectrum of many things. Physical. You are looking at the mental. You are looking at the emotional state. Even now, we have begun to look beyond and begin to look at the economic aspect of children, where the child lives. So a light to a drug-free childhood presupposes that we want the children to live a well-meaningful life. Now, as the child is transiting through adolescence to useful life, to adulthood, there are going to be some alterations. Their life are going to be, they're going to meet things which are going to disrupt, which are going to affect their lives. And some of these are diversities. And coming particularly from a country like Uganda, where we've had a lot of wars in the past, where we've had a lot of HIV, and recently the COVID-19, and so many things happening, particularly in a country of low resource income, there are going to be many disruptions which are going to affect children. And some of these are going to lead to children to become street children, to be homeless. They are going to be orphans. We are going to have a huge number of children who are parentless, who don't have, people to care for them. Even when the parents are there, the parents cannot provide. And all these will disrupt the child and will affect the well-being of the child. These things of poverty are going to come up. Children are going to be moved from villages, are going to be trafficked and brought into the city to work as, in child labor. They're also going to get involved in prostitution, in sex exploitation, and their lives are going to be disrupted. But also, somebody who has worked with children, I know that once life has been disrupted, instead of talking about well-being, we are now going to talk about ill-being. Ill-being is the worst scenario a child can face. Because, first of all, the harm which is going to be caused by the drugs, the stigmatization because of what is going through, death, we have also noticed death, but also there are a lot of other psychosocial problems which you have to do what? Which you have to face. Now, assuming, actually what we have seen, that drug abuse does not come alone. Many times, there's comorbidity issues. You find a child who is facing drug abuse issue is either homeless, he has nowhere to stay, is facing sex exploitation, is coming from a poverty-stricken family, he has no contacts at all, and here is the young man, here is the young person who has been brought to you. So you as a social worker, what did you do? By the very interesting, and for you to know, not all children are abusing drugs, because the presupposition is that all children are abusing drugs. It's a smaller percentage which is affected, and that's what our experience is showing us. That much as many children will have problems, not many of them will abuse drugs. For example, I'm coming from a country where we drink more. Actually, there was a time when Uganda was #1 in terms of drinking alcohol. I've seen in India, you like the thing, but there was a time when we were #1 globally, and that was highlighted by WHO. Now, what do we see? Not all children are abusing drugs, but children are at the age, if they are not helped to abuse drugs. They are likely to get involved in drugs. That's why we need to draw strategies which can help them to address. But in my discussion when I was sharing with the program people, I wanted us to focus more on children themselves. Work with children. Children don't give long speeches like we do. If there is a crisis for them, it is short and quick. And that's what experience is telling us. In other words, child participation involving children themselves to be active in the change you want them to see gives us a lot of mileage. And children, as we develop this resolution which was passed by the UN, thanks to our friends, Batej and others, early prevention. I think what we need to add is that we need to involve children in the changes. Children can complement our activities. Children can speak to their friends. Children can refer their friends. Children can even engage in activities without we adults and the social workers, and you'll see a lot of mileage. I'm coming in a country where we've had a sudden drop in tobacco smoking. We don't have a smoking problem in my country. Actually, when people come to our country, they get surprised. Young people are not smoking because we started early. We involved the children. Children spoke to themselves. Children spoke to their dad. Children spoke to their colleagues. And the colleagues begin to ask you questions. And this is a message. When we say children matter in the change, in things which affect them. Let the children be number one, be the drivers, and we, the social workers, the doctors, can give them the energy to change. Once they get the information, they have the zeal, they have the power to revolutionize and to make changes. That's why I'm saying we work with children, but also work with their family, help children to find meaning to their life. Of course, as you do this, you are going to integrate. It's going to be like a buffet intervention. You have a homeless child, you have a child with drug abuse, he's coming from a poverty family. You are likely to do an integrated buffet approach. Don't insist on one-line treatment. By the way, children are malleable and children can change. That's the big thing, that's the greatest thing we have. Children are willing to change. If they have not reached age 21, they are likely to listen, they are likely to think through, and their experience has showed that actually children can change. And they want to have fun, they want to enjoy, they want to be part of the change. They have big dreams. And when they see drugs coming in and interfering, they get scared, but children can change. That's why the interventions we are drawing, not only listen to children, but can we give them audience? Can we create forums? Can we create platforms where children themselves are helping others? We are having testimonies in Kampala where children come back and assist their colleagues, where children find their colleagues' resources. We are not there, like for now we are here in Kelal. Who knows what is happening there when you left Moldova? It's the young people who are speaking to their colleagues. And the young people, once they have got the message, they'll speak it positively, they'll help their colleagues, and you'll see a lot of changes. And actually children will be able to transit from ill-being to well-being, because they want to have a light, free childhood where they enjoy. And many of them have aspirations. There is nothing which can touch you if you picked a young person out of school, talk to him, he goes back to school and now he's a doctor. And he comes to you and say, because of you, man, because of you, woman, you made me what I am. And I think that's the greatest testimony we can hear. And my encouragement as we discuss the matter, the children matter, the right to a free childhood, is that let's give children a position in all the intervention we are doing. The children will take us very far. They are the future of tomorrow. They are the next generation. The children are wise. They know better. They are the screen generation. And if you give them right information, they'll pass it over. Thank you so much for the invitation and for allowing me to share. Thank you.
I want to congratulate and thank all of you for your very keen listening and active participation in this session. And I want to congratulate all our panelists, Dr. Atul, Ambekar, Dr. Harvey Milkman, Dr. Mousa, Daoud, and Dr. Rogers Kasirye for their excellent presentations around the topic of children matter, and particularly on a drug-free childhood for children. And I'm very happy that Dr. Rogers also told us that children do matter. Children can even change adults. And that was a great inspiration from Uganda that he has brought to us. I want to apologize. We won't be able to take questions now, but our panelists are available to take questions at lunchtime and even afterwards during their stay here with us. And as we leave for our lunch, I would request all of you to just stand up and shout together the two words that Dr. Daoud has told us about. Let us shout, Duba, Duba. Thank you so much.
Just to let you know, as we are a little bit over time, we still want to give you an hour lunch. So we will be back 2:15 the next, so 2:15. Thank you so much.